Well, hello everybody. This is Professor Dunham again. It is Monday the 21st. I know that you've had a really long week. This is a heavy lift chapter 7. There's a lot of reading, a lot of work. I'm assuming many of you, or some of you I should say, probably took my suggestion to do the shorter readings, and I hope you did. I think I did note that in at least one of the parts or subparts of Module 7. Others, and I hope it's only a small minority, I'm hoping that most of you did the readings and have hopefully contributed to the discussion threads. From what I can tell, just a few of you that didn't, at least not as of today. I wanted to step back a bit. I know it's been a long week. I know how it is to be a grad student, and I know how difficult it is balancing work, life pressures, health issues, family matters, and then this stuff. I get it. But if you don't communicate with me, and if you don't tell me what's going on in your life, all I got to look at is the system, your inputs, the analytics that the system gives me, and my own judgment as to the quality of your work. So we're kind of approaching the halfway point. Maybe we're past the halfway point by some metric. It's not too late to salvage lower grades, so you kind of know where you're at. You can figure that out pretty easily. You got to pick up the phone if you're not sure, because there's a very small number of you, you're still missing the point. Now, that might be on purpose. I think there's one of you out there who's made the calculus, hey, I do the bare minimum, I'm getting by, I'm good with that, I got a lot. That's fine. That's your risk analysis. That's your cost benefit analysis. And if you've done that, it's fine with me. But remember, at the end, you get what you paid for. And if you don't put enough money down and if you don't put enough sweat equity into the class, you're not going to get much more than a C, right? So just remember that's your calculus. Okay, so I sense one of you is doing that. Not a problem. I haven't reached out to you because I kind of can tell. Well, actually, I did reach out to you, and not getting feedback tells me that you're cool with the way things are. Fine. We are not dealing with high school students here, undergrad. You're graduate students. You're adults. You know, you've got as much of stress and burden as I do in my life, if not more. So I get it. For the others who have kind of missed this idea, what are we doing? Even in Module 7. In Module 7, we are refining your ethical framework. We're trying to get you to hone in, you can tell by the plan exercises in particular, to really pinpoint what are your core values that underpin that ethical framework. Now understand, we move from one framework to another, sometimes within the same day, sometimes within the same situation, but those core values should typically remain the same. If they don't, that's something that we would want to kind of really ask ourselves about. Because if they change, that could be a character or a matter of our character. Call it a character flaw, whatever, or just a part of your character. But remember, you're refining who you are. And if you never got paper 1 right, or kind of don't understand it still, you might have gotten a decent grade, but you still don't get it, call me up. That's what you got to do. Everyone else that has, I think there were 2 or 3 of you that did, you immediately got it after we spoke about it for a few minutes. So as we transition now, okay, from Module 7, which was your heavy lift module, into Module 8, I want you to take a little breather. It's going to be lighter reading, much lighter in 8, okay? I'll release that tomorrow. You're going to be looking at plant. We're taking responsibility. Plant wants you to understand what taking responsibility is. And I've got a video of a gentleman I used to work for who's now with, actually, he was on our board, He's now a commissioner of the IRS, the commissioner of the IRS, Danny Werfel. Um, he's getting grilled by Congress over this issue of responsibility. And I ask a couple of questions about that. Um, you'll see it in the teaser line of, or I guess the explanatory line to the video. And one of the things Plant talks about, and Danny kind of shows a little bit of this. He's really smooth. He was an Obama appointee when I knew him, and smart, very smart man. Went to Yale, and but he can filibuster, and he knows the D.C. way very well. But he doesn't really become defensive, but you can see he's pushing back a little bit, and of course, you know, the theatrics of Congress, they want him to look like he's the bad guy. But when you take responsibility, you're not defensive. Now, whether or not you find Mr. Werfel defensive, you know, that's your objective or subjective view. Um, Personally, I didn't find him defensive. I kind of understood where he was going with the question, trying to pivot, and that might have gotten the congressman a little upset. Um, but I've seen I've seen real examples of witnesses being defensive or political appointees being defensive, and I don't think that's the case here. But you might differ, okay? Um, so taking responsibility, stop being defensive. Some of you in class, I think, are realizing your defense mechanisms. And one of them is you continually search out one another who you share an affinity or an opinion with. That's a defense mechanism. You're not opening yourselves up. Now, I understand there are topics that some of you have raised that are considered taboo, such as the issue of abortion. I get that. You want to be very careful with that issue because to some it's very near and dear. But even that, as I mentioned in a prior video, can be handled delicately by logical, reasoning, and critical thinking. Remember, trying to take our emotions away and just kind of dealing with facts and circumstances. And this is where Plant's going, where he then talks about respect for life. And in that case, I think what he's really talking about is, you know, let's say you're a Trumper, you're a deplorable, you're a white racist. That's the labels some will give you, right? Well, what happens if somebody calls you, oh, you're a libtard. Oh, you're a left-wing Marxist, socialist, radical, communist, blah, blah, blah. That's bad. That's not respecting one another. Let's say you happen to be what they say you are. Does that make you less of a human being? The politicians today, the media today want you to do that. They want to balkanize and keep the country balkanized for their own power concentration. It's just not me believing that after all these years of living on this earth and following politics and just living. Many social scientists are saying this. They are really concerned. And one social scientist that came out and actually wrote the book, The Lucifer Effect, Philip Zimbardo. One of you mentioned this, I believe, in your post early on. The Stanford studies, where he grabbed college students. Some were prison guards, some were to act as prisoners, and to make a long story short, the ones who were selected to be prison guards became very abusive, and the students who played the prisoners became very docile and accepting the punishment, and it got kind of sadistic. So Mr. Zimbardo at the time, or Dr. Zimbardo, was criticized for not monitoring the study carefully enough, and he admitted his failure. He took responsibility. That's why I bought the book, because he said, if you folks didn't learn from my mistake, that's a problem. The Abu Ghraib situation in 2003, some of you were probably still in diapers, where our U.S. soldiers abused the Iraqi prisoners, sexually abused them, emotionally, physically tortured them. Horrible abuse. Some of it was done through the military's psychological, if you will, interrogation techniques. And they were practically, and they were, I would consider them immoral, because you wouldn't want to be treated that way. And it was because there was no accountability, no responsibility. They could do whatever they wanted to. The ends justified the means. This is where Plante's going with respect for life. When you dehumanize that deplorable, you dehumanize that socialist, you begin eroding the sanctity of life, the humanness that they are. So if we were in 1938 Nazi Germany, you could put a gun to the back of the head and pull the trigger and say, they were a Trumper. They were a libtard. Didn't matter. Do you see how dangerous the words are? When we have differences of opinion and we begin to hate, you might not like the policy of having tariffs on China, for example. You might actually despise that policy, or despise, the Federal Reserve's monetary easing or tightening. But don't despise and hate the people who made the decision. They're still humans. Now, why they made the decision, it would be good to know, right? Try to understand that. So remember, don't dehumanize by falling into what they, the system, in my humble opinion, want you to do, to dislike and actually hate. We got to stop that if we're going to maintain integrity. Use your critical thinking. Now, if any of you want to take, instead of a sociological approach to this, you could take more of a spiritual or religious approach. You could take a look at this book written by a Chinese sect. Some of you up in New York understand who the Falun Gong are. The Falun Gong have this book, the Falun Dafa, which is a combination of Buddhism and Taoism that began in China in the 1990s, and many of the protesters in the Tiananmen Square situation were followers. This book, by the way, the Zhuan Falun, can be gotten for free. They'll send it to you. That's how I received it. And you read it. And don't be afraid. It's not going to convert you to something that you might not want to be. It'll open your mind. You will actually note and hear similarities between the Judeo-Christian beliefs as well. It's very interesting how the major religions, and I should have put in Islam too, view a lot of this stuff in a very similar way, despite what you hear. So, respect for life. Respect other people's opinions when they even differ from yours 180 degrees. I always say, doesn't matter who's in the White House. What matters is who's in the next house, your neighbor. Start treating them right, regardless. That's building your ethical muscle, which we also get into with Plante. Plante talks on page 129. He uses a recipe. He has a mnemonic there, right? Respect, responsibility, integrity, competence, and concern are things you need to build ethical muscle. I really think ultimately it's about courage and doing what you might find uncomfortable, which is stepping into your opponent's shoes, so to speak, or into the other person's shoes and seeing it from their point of view. Kind of that double think we talked about early in the semester, where you're not so sure. Like I said to some of you, double think might not be a bad idea. You should have two minds about something, I believe, because you want to reconcile. You just don't want to be an ideologue. It's only my way or this way or the highway. No, I think there's more nuance in everything. I don't want to use that term. You often hear, oh, it's nuanced, it's nuanced. Sometimes as an excuse. But I do think there are different facets to the problems that keep us divided that we need to investigate where we have common ground. So think about building ethical muscle by embracing arguments from the other side as being as legitimate as yours, and they might actually be better than yours. Be open to that and be open to change, because remember, what makes you happy at 20 ain't going to be making you happy at 50, 60, or 70 years old. Trust me. The way I thought when I was 20 is not the way I'm thinking now. I often say, I'll never forget driving back home from a summer night down in Belmar, New Jersey, driving down the Garden State Parkway, probably going 85, 90 miles an hour, had a beer can in one hand and a joint in another. I don't do that anymore, my friends. Those days are gone. But there I thought, a certain way. My framework, certain values. They were kind of messed up, right? But as I matured and conscious development occurred, I was like, that was so stupid. So allow yourself to know that you're going to change. Now, most of the values, though, will remain the same, okay? So remember, what makes you happy today doesn't make you happy tomorrow. The way you think about an issue today may not be how you think about it tomorrow, especially if you're caught in that issue, okay? So give people grace and freedom to express their views when they're even different than yours. Don't name call them. Don't dare think they're deplorable or non-human, okay? Understand that they're seeing things differently and maybe even clearer than you. Be open to that. Duska then tells us there are certain questions that you can ask yourself to justify your thinking or your decision making, not to rationalize. Many of you can rationalize, let me tell you. We can all, those are finding excuses. Why did you take the cookie out of the cookie jar when you knew dinner time was coming? Well, Mom, I just thought that the dessert could be eaten first, and that would maybe make me even hungrier to eat all my green beans and my spinach and my meat, or whatever. I mean, we continue this rationalization well into adulthood. It's a defense mechanism, but it's a wall. Now, I don't know if it was Kamira, it might have been you. Forgive me if it was someone else. I don't want to attribute a wonderful insight, so I don't want to. But one of you, it might have been Kamira, mentioned something about almost like having a revelation about, hey, look, I'm uncovering something about my own ethical framework and values going through these plan exercises. And I thought that was great. Please forgive me. I read your journal entries, I read your discussion threads, and I'm trying to keep things generic, but sometimes they bleed over. So, but a lot of you, I hope, from what I can tell, are enjoying the plan exercises. And you're being very detailed about them. And I'm happy to see that the majority of you are doing well. You're embracing the pop quizzes, at least a few of you, about 3 or 4 of you are, and you're really making up for a lot of lost points. And for those of you that haven't embraced the pop quizzes, these are easy layup shots. I mean, this is like watching Caitlin Clark without having anybody on the court. I mean, even with the court, even if she's double teamed, hitting those 3-pointers. Which isn't kind of a shame that I think we've lost her to the European League. It's a real shame. But anyhow, these are easy layup shots, the pop quizzes. So please think about those. And in Duska, we also talk about virtue and character. And he mentions 4 virtues, cardinal virtues. And I'm looking at my notes, folks. Wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage. Wisdom is knowing how best to apply the knowledge you have. We have a gentleman at work who's a real good accounting geek, great nerd, like me, very technical. But his lack of experience, because he's such a young man, he knows all the accounting rules, but how to properly apply them, when to apply them, what's material, what isn't. Um, when you're in the field and the operational aspects, you have a different understanding on how to apply the knowledge. That's wisdom, okay? Knowing how to apply your knowledge, not just being smart. So Duska talks about wisdom. Um, he talks about justice, okay? Justice should be blind. It should not be just for a particular group. It should be applied universally, okay? Um, and that was a great thing about the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement tested the Constitution, tested our core values as a nation. And the civil rights movement said, put up or shut up. Are all men created equal? Yes or no? And it was because of that movement the nation grew. Its ethical muscle grew. Did it hurt? It hurt. It hurt those who protested for change, and it hurt for those who wanted to keep the established order. But together, we broke ground and we tested those principles and we put them into effect. Perfectly? No, absolutely not. But point to me another nation, right? I always say, that's done it better. Okay? Temperance, being patient. Okay? That also means having some compassion. And the other cardinal virtue, which I believe Duska gets right, is courage. And I really think that's what Plant should be using in his mnemonic regarding building ethical muscle. You need courage to build up ethical muscle. I'll never forget the first time I was asked to go to a meeting of all men. And I was the only straight man invited. It was actually a party. Well, kind of a party. It was like a get-together. And I went because I'm cool with it. Everything's fine. I know where I'm at, and we actually had a really nice time. It was kind of lighthearted, some of the fellows would come up to me and say, is it okay if I give you a hug? I'm like, sure it is. Give me a hug, man. Not a problem. So putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation allows for growth, okay, and understanding. So it takes courage, though. And courage is not just being bold. It's like kind of dealing with your fear and saying, I'm not going to let the fear get the best of me. I'm still going to put my foot forward a little bit, and you'll be surprised at what happens. You'll say, hey, hanging out with these guys is pretty cool. Good food, good conversation, just like anything else, right? Breaking those barriers, breaking those stereotypes, okay? So courage. When you talk about your cardinal virtues in Duska, Duska also talks about the whistleblower, and that too takes courage, okay? And to me, that's a last resort. I, from my personal experience, would say to you, if you're ever in that situation, try first of all to basically avoid it. It's like what they teach in self-defense courses. Be aware of your surroundings. That's why paper number 2 is so important. Beware of your surroundings. If it don't feel right in your gut, listen. Let the upper brain kick in, but at the same time, don't ignore the gut instinct. It's there for a reason. If you understand your environment and you think it's susceptible to being unethical, illegal, fraudulent, whatever, get out. Just get out, because you're either dealing with sociopaths, and not just one, narcissists, or what we call them in Jersey, weasels. You know, a weasel. They do whatever the power tells them to do. They can't stand up for anything. They have no integrity, no backbone. All they want to do is please their bosses so they keep their paycheck coming in and then go home, you know, and do whatever they got to do. So I'm being a bit facetious, but I think I'm also telling you the truth. This is the way it is, okay? Avoid having to become a whistleblower, because there was a Harvard study done about 15 years ago that documented and chronicled whistleblowers in the pharma industry. Almost all of them were destroyed one way or the other. Financially, devastated, having to hire attorneys. Led to broken marriages and broken families. Led to being blackballed at age 45, 50 and trying to find another job, maybe as a Walmart greeter, right? The interesting thing was, most of them said if they were confronted with this, most of them did, not all, they would do it again because they stood on principle. Core principle, you see that ethical framework underpinning. What we should do, if you're in that paper 2 situation and you're saying, oh my God, there's some crazy going on here, you want to be a lamplighter. Frank Serpico, famous whistleblower from the 70s, New York police, he was a street cop. He said, what we need today, not whistleblowers, because by then it's too late. You need lamplighters. You need people before the fraud gets out of hand, before it even is committed. And I interpret that as being proactive in your governance, with your internal controls, with your peer reviews, your quality assurance checks, whatever it might be. Having a board of directors and an audit committee that really cares about governance and takes matters seriously and looks to nip things in the bud. Having a policy that talks about, not just really talks about, but has consequences and not just a slap on the wrist. You know, we need teeth. So one of the things I asked early on about that video is, do you need a form of punishment to have accountability? Question. One last thing. There was a very interesting, very brief dialogue between Jake and I think it was Kamira on courage and virtues, where I think Jake makes a really good point that in his reading, you can read it, it's towards the bottom of the thread of his post, that we have an obligation, or feels he has an obligation to help others see the virtuous way of dealing with a situation. And I think that's spot on for me. I mean, I agree. I think Kamira, you also, and I believe it was Kamira, agreed. And I think you should look at that. Are you a lamplighter? Do you light the way? Do you point to the right way? Or do you say, I don't give a crap, I'm just sitting back here picking up my paycheck, I'm just waiting to get out? You can do that too, but then you're certainly not part of the solution. You're part of the problem that we're trying to deal with in public service. Okay? With that being said, I have held you longer than usual. I know. Oh my God, this is so painful, isn't it? I know 7 was. 7 was difficult. So, Pop Quiz 4, for those of you that decided to hang in there. Pop Quiz 4 will be analyze the video with Danny Werfel. Tell me what you see. Make it 2 paragraphs, not crazy. And or think about this issue of accountability, double standards, and whether or not you need a head on a stick at the end of the day. Have a wonderful week and enjoy the reading in 8, okay? When I release it tomorrow. Take it easy. And again, you know my number. Don't risk your grade going like that. There's no reason to, unless you want to do it.